Why are Australians getting taller? Australians today are taller than their grandparents. But why? Is it genetics? Is it diet? Or is it something else entirely? Over the last century, Australians have added several centimeters to their average height, enough to make today's generation stand head and shoulders above those who came before. This is not just a story of numbers on a growth chart. It is a story that weaves together history, science, culture, and the future of human health. So why are Australians getting taller? Let's find out. To understand why Australians are taller today, we must first step back in time. Imagine Australia in the early 1900s. The sunburnt land stretched wide, the cities were smaller, and life for many families was about hard work and survival. Historical records tell us that the average Australian man stood around 170 centimeters tall, about 5'7". Women were around 160 centimeters. By today's standards, that is noticeably shorter. The reason lies in the harsh realities of life back then. Australia was still carrying the legacy of its convict past, where poor nutrition, overcrowding, and disease were common. Families often struggled to put food on the table. Bread, salted meat, and tea were staples, but fresh fruit, vegetables, and protein-rich meals were luxuries for many. For children, this meant their bodies simply didn't have the building blocks to grow to their full potential. Diseases like measles, tuberculosis, and influenza frequently swept through towns, weakening young bodies and stunting growth. Imagine being a child in the late 19th century, fighting illness after illness without modern medicine, while your diet lacked the nutrients needed for growth. Height was not a priority, survival was. That was the Australia our great-grandparents grew up in, and it is no wonder they were shorter than us. The story begins to change after the Second World War. Australia emerged from the conflict ready to build a new future, and with that came economic growth, expanding cities, and new opportunities. Most importantly, the diet of Australians began to improve dramatically. Milk became a staple in households. Fresh fruit and vegetables were more available. Meat was no longer a rare treat, but a regular part of the dinner table. For the first time, Australian children were growing up with access to a balanced diet. At the same time, medical advances transformed childhood. Vaccines saved lives. Antibiotics cured infections that once crippled children. Hospitals became more accessible, and doctors could provide care across growing cities and regional areas. Families no longer feared losing multiple children to preventable illnesses, and healthier children meant taller adults. By the 1950s and 1960s, a new generation was visibly taller, their growth reflecting the prosperity of post-war Australia. But what actually determines how tall we become? Science gives us the answer, and it is more fascinating than you might think. Around 80% of our height is written into our DNA. If your parents are tall, the odds are high that you will be tall as well, because your genetic code has already laid out a blueprint for how your bones, muscles, and tissues will grow. Genes decide everything from the length of your legs, the proportions of your torso, and even how your growth plates in the bones open and close during puberty. But that other 20%, the part shaped by the environment, makes all the difference between being merely average or reaching your full height potential. This is where diet, health, and lifestyle step in. Childhood is the most critical window for growth because the body is developing at its fastest rate. During these years, nutrition acts as the fuel. Protein helps build muscle fibers and tissue repair. Calcium and vitamin D strengthen the bones and determine how dense and long they will become. Vitamins A and C regulate growth processes, ensuring cells divide and develop properly. If the diet is strong, the genetic blueprint is followed almost perfectly. If the diet is poor, those plans are interrupted and the body builds shorter, weaker frames. Sleep is another factor often overlooked. While a child sleeps, especially in the deep stages of rest, the body releases growth hormone from the pituitary gland, a chemical messenger that signals bones to lengthen and muscles to expand. Missed sleep means missed opportunities for growth. Exercise too has a role to play. Running, jumping, and stretching the body places healthy stress on bones, telling them to grow stronger and sometimes longer. That is why children who are active often develop healthier, taller frames compared to those who are sedentary. But when malnutrition, illness, or poverty intervene, the story changes. A child who suffers repeated infections or diseases spends their body's energy fighting for survival rather than growing taller. Their growth plates close earlier, their bones set shorter, and their genetic potential is never reached. This was the case for many Australians in the 19th century, when poor diets and frequent disease stunted growth across generations. Today, however, the opposite is true. Modern Australians have access to balanced diets, reliable healthcare, and healthier lifestyles, which allow their bodies to fulfill, and in some cases even maximize, the genetic potential written in their DNA. In simple terms, genetics sets the ceiling, but the environment decides how close we get to touching it. Australia's food culture became one of its greatest advantages, and it has played a key role in shaping the height of its people. With vast stretches of fertile farmland, lush grazing pastures for cattle, and clean oceans teeming with fish, Australians have long had access to a diet rich in essential nutrients. Dairy, in particular, became a cornerstone of the national diet, with milk, cheese, and butter providing calcium to strengthen bones and proteins to fuel growth. Fresh fruit and vegetables, grown in temperate and tropical climates across the continent, delivered the vitamins and minerals needed for cell development. Meat and seafood supplied iron and zinc, ensuring that children had the resources to grow tall and strong. Unlike many parts of the world where famine, war, or economic hardship restricted diets, Australia enjoyed relative abundance, and this abundance was passed on directly to the next generation's physical stature. The government played its part too. In the mid-20th century, milk drinking campaigns were introduced in schools, with posters, radio programs, and teachers encouraging children to drink at least 1 glass of milk a day. It was simple, it was affordable, and it worked. By the 1960s, many Australian children were consuming more calcium and protein than their parents ever had, setting them on a course to outgrow previous generations. At the same time, the rise of supermarkets transformed family diets. For the first time, families could walk into a store and find not just bread and meat, but aisles filled with fruits, vegetables, cereals, canned goods, and imported items. This variety meant children were exposed to more balanced meals, which ensured healthier and taller growth. But nutrition was only one piece of the puzzle. Healthcare became the backbone of this transformation. Vaccines, antibiotics, and widespread medical services dramatically reduced the impact of childhood diseases. Fewer children died young, and fewer had their growth stunted by long-lasting infections. A healthier child was not only more likely to survive, but also more likely to grow taller, stronger, and more resilient. Then came lifestyle. Australia embraced a culture of sport and the outdoors. Whether it was swimming in the surf, playing rugby on a muddy field, running along beaches, or competing in cricket and AFL, Australian children were constantly in motion. This active lifestyle placed positive stress on bones and muscles, strengthening them and encouraging growth. A sedentary child's body conserves energy, but an active child's body builds itself up, and in Australia, the latter became the norm. Immigration added yet another layer. After the devastation of World War II, Australia opened its doors to millions of migrants from Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. This influx of people brought new traditions, new cultures, and crucially, new genes. When populations mix, genetic diversity increases, sometimes blending taller and shorter lineages to create children who are taller than either parent. Over decades, this genetic mixing helped shape a new Australian identity, one not just growing in number, but also in stature. By the end of the 20th century, Australia had become a nation defined by tall, strong, healthy generations. Its diet, its healthcare, its active lifestyle, and its openness to the world all worked together to transform the body of its people. Australia's growth and height was not happening in isolation. Around the world, similar trends were unfolding. Japan, for example, saw one of the most dramatic shifts. After the devastation of World War II, Japanese diets improved, and in just a few generations, the average height of Japanese citizens rose by more than 10 centimeters. In Europe, the Netherlands emerged as the tallest nation on Earth, with Dutch men today averaging over 183 centimeters, or 6 foot. Their secret? A combination of genetics, dairy-heavy diets, and excellent healthcare. By contrast, the United States, once a leader in height, has plateaued since the 1970s. Poor diets, rising obesity, and health inequalities have stalled American growth. Where does Australia fit in? Australians today rank among the taller populations globally, though not quite as tall as the Dutch. Yet compared to the convict settlers of the 1800s, the difference is striking. The Australian body itself has become a symbol of prosperity and progress. Height does not just matter on paper. It shapes society in surprising ways. Sports are the most obvious example. Basketball, rugby, and Australian rules football reward height and strength, and it is no accident that Australia produces world-class athletes across these fields. But height also affects everyday life in subtle ways. Clothing sizes have changed over the decades, with larger frames requiring bigger shirts, longer trousers, and redesigned uniforms. Public transport, housing, and even office furniture have all adapted to accommodate taller generations. Sit in an old 1940s tram, and you may find the seats cramped. Walk through a heritage building, and you may notice the doorways feel lower. That is because Australians really are taller now, and society has had to adjust around them. This brings us to the future. Will Australians continue to get taller, or has the growth spurt reached its peak? Scientists believe that populations eventually plateau when they reach their genetic potential. In other words, there comes a point when the environment can no longer push height higher. Australia may be nearing that stage. But there are challenges too. Modern life is not all healthy diets and active play. Fast food, sugary drinks, sedentary lifestyles, and rising childhood obesity could slow or even reverse the trend. It is possible that Australians may grow wider, not taller. Yet, for now, the story of Australian height remains one of success. A clear example of how environment and society can reshape the human body in just a few generations. So next time you stand beside your grandparents and notice the difference in height, remember this: you are not imagining it. Australians really are taller than the generations before them. Behind every centimeter is a story of hardship, survival, recovery, and progress. From the struggles of the past to the prosperity of today, Australia's growth is written in its people. And as we look to the future, height remains more than a number. It is a reflection of who we are and who we are becoming. This has been the story of why Australians are getting taller. If you enjoyed this journey into history, science, and society, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that explain the world around us.